All right. So, um, thank you very much for joining us for this presentation by Professor Axel Don on the topic of carbon farming. The event is hosted by the Biomaterialities Research Group at Humboldt University of Berlin. My name is Johannes Ferle, and I will be moderating the discussion later and also giving you a short introduction, telling you about the research project very briefly, the speaker, and our interest in carbon farming and hearing Axel Don on this topic. Biomaterialities is a 5-year research project funded by the BMBF, the German Ministry of Education and Research, and we're a team of researchers ranging from student assistants to postdocs. And we're working on society-nature relations and the way they change in the so-called bioeconomy. The bioeconomy, as many of you will know, is a political project to transform the material and energetic basis of the economy by using biogenic resources with the goal of achieving a more sustainable society. Our research is characterized by a social science approach and a focus on the materiality of living nature and the valorization of living nature through high technologies. We seek to answer the question how production, reproduction, and politics are shaping the bioeconomy and are in turn shaped by it. We work with a range of approaches from feminist political ecology to political economy and STS. And if you're interested to learn more about our research and our output, there are, as well as future talks, you can do so on our website, biomaterialities.de, or through our YouTube channel. Also, if you want to rewatch this lecture or see other ones that we've held in the past, you can go to youtube.com/@biomaterialities. But enough about us. I now have the pleasure to introduce today's guest, Professor Dr. Axel Don, before saying a few words about carbon farming and our interest in it. Axel Don is Deputy Director of the Thünen-Institut of Climate Smart Agriculture, as well as Professor at the Technical University of Braunschweig. He is one of the leading soil scientists in Germany and was the leader of the data analysis of the Bodenzustandserhebung in Germany, which I would roughly translate as mapping the condition of soils. There's probably a better and more technical translation, but that's in essence what it is. He has also written more than 80 peer-reviewed publications focusing on humus management, sequestration of soil organic carbon, the influence of land use changes on biochemical cycles, to name only a few of the areas of his expertise. So Axel is clearly a preeminent scientist to talk about carbon sequestration and carbon farming. The question is, why do we as a team of researchers exploring the bioeconomy from a social science perspective invite as soil scientists? And what exactly are we talking about when we talk about carbon farming in the first place? To begin with the second question, I find it helpful to distinguish between 3 aspects of carbon farming, which are in use and which are not always clearly distinguished. Firstly, we have what I will call the natural science understanding. Here, carbon farming refers to a number of measures to remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it somewhere else. Most often, this refers to storing carbon in soils, but sometimes it also includes technologies such as direct air capture, so drawing carbon from the atmosphere and throwing it into salt mines, for instance, or rocks or things like that. Secondly, we have carbon farming as a political project, the attempt to create incentives for land users, particularly farmers, to change their land use practices so that the soils they work with sequester more carbon. Thirdly, we also have carbon farming as a business model in which companies create carbon farming programs in which they try to convince farmers to change their land use to sequester carbon, which they measure or model and then sell as carbon credits on voluntary markets. Obviously, none of these are mutually exclusive or clearly separable, since these spheres often interconnect and refer to one another. And this brings me to my first question. As soil scientists, we are of course interested, social scientists, sorry. As social scientists, we are of course interested particularly in the second and third use of the term, political measures taken to implement or regulate carbon farming measures and attempts to valorize carbon farming through voluntary markets. Both of these developments, however, hinge on the debate in the natural sciences about which measures store carbon for how long and how to measure the amount stored. Since the entire debate about carbon farming as a tool to combat climate change rests on the idea of permanently storing carbon in soils, and permanence is something that's very loaded and non-permanent, which I'm sure Axel has more to say about. And we therefore need a clear understanding of not only permanence, but also how much carbon is stored and how to measure it. This question is anything but trivial. Carbon certificates sold through commercial carbon farming schemes are what some economists call a credence good. A buyer cannot ascertain whether or not what they paid for is what they get. In contrast to buying a ton of coal, for instance, I cannot weigh a ton of carbon that was supposedly removed from the atmosphere, since there is nothing handed to me other than a certificate. It stays in some soil, someplace. A credible claim about carbon captured thus depends on concrete measurements of soil carbon compared to a baseline, or on the modeling of certain land practice uses. And the same is true for political measures. Claims by government bodies about a certain number of CO2 removed from the atmosphere likewise depend on accurate sampling or modeling. And this is precisely why it is so crucial to understand the soil science behind carbon farming, with its uncertainties and margins of errors, since the entire political and economic project of carbon farming ultimately rests on these findings and the larger question of what these carbon farming measures can contribute materially to attempts to reverse greenhouse gas emissions. And this is where we, as social, not soil scientists, have to take a step back and hand over to the experts. So it's your turn, Axel.
Yeah, thank you, Johannes. Thank you for the nice introduction and for giving the scope of this today's lecture. I will share my screen with you and start with an introduction into the challenge of combat climate change. And carbon farming is really one solution among many different tasks that need to be taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And here you see from the European scale and perspective that we have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and we are on the way to reduce them, and we need to reduce them. But at some point, we will have unavoidable emissions. And they are mainly from agriculture, I must say, but also from other sectors. And in order to reach net zero emissions in 2050, we need to balance them with negative emissions. And carbon farming, as Johannes already said, could provide such negative emissions to compensate remaining greenhouse gas emissions. And the ambitions are really, really large from the EU. They want to double the current carbon sink in the land use sector, the LULUCF land use and land use change in forestry sector in the next 6 years, creating a huge sink of more than 300 million tons of CO2. And one option and one way to achieve this is to foster a voluntary CO2 certificate market under the topic carbon farming. If we look at the emissions in this sector, LULUCF, for Germany, we see this picture that we have bars that are positive, these are emissions, and we have bars that are negative, these are sinks. And the net in Germany is the yellow point, and we see that since 3 years we have emissions of this sector. Before it was a sink, and it's really that the forest is here drawing down carbon from the atmosphere and storing it in biomass and soil. And on the other side, we have agriculture, and it's mainly organic soils drained for cropland and grassland, emitting high emissions here. And we see that if we want to use this sector as a sink, we have really a challenge in Germany. And also, if we look at European scale, here only looking at the soils, we have the organic soils emitting a lot of carbon, either in grassland or in cropland. So the brownish colors are in croplands. And we have the mineral soils with the potential to sequester additional carbon. And for the moment, we have at European scale, we have emissions from the land use sector. And it's really, a challenge to turn this into a net sink. It's not a new idea, and to really use our ecosystems as carbon sinks. In 2015, when the climate treaty in Paris was signed, also an initiative was founded called the 4 per mil initiative for more soil carbon. And it was the idea of this guy here, the French agriculture ministry at this time. And he said we could really achieve something for the climate if we use the soils as carbon sinks. And he calculated that at a global scale, if we would theoretically increase global soil carbon stocks by only 4 per mil, which is 4 thousandths or 0.4% per year, then we could compensate all greenhouse gas emissions that are human-made. And this is only a theoretical calculation, so don't take it serious. So it's not a single solution to the climate problem, but it shows that soils and the stocks of carbon in the soil, that they matter for the global carbon cycling. And in this initiative, it was also recognized that soil carbon can help for climate adaptation and food security. And I will come to this later on. I would provide you with a carbon farming definition that is kind of in between of what Johannes told you. And it's a definition that is also in an EU technical guide book, and saying that carbon farming refers to the management of carbon pools and greenhouse gas fluxes at farm level with the purpose of mitigating climate change. So you see here in the definition, it's also about greenhouse gas fluxes, including nitrous oxide and methane. And it's not only about soil carbon. And that's a good definition. I like it because we should really have a broader definition in order to really get to the point that we achieve climate mitigation. And how to do this? So there's a second definition, and this is carbon farming can be defined as a green business model. And only to illustrate this a little bit, so there are lots of companies out there that want to invest into climate mitigation and also show that they do something, maybe also claiming that their products are more green or CO2 neutral, and they want to have certificates showing and that carbon farming was achieved. Carbon farming needs to be done by the farmers. So they are really the actors, and in between are certifiers or kind of companies that ensure that there is really climate mitigation and carbon removal going on, and convert this sequestered carbon into certificates that are sold to companies. And now the reality of the soil, because I'm a soil scientist and I want to show you what is the reality of the soil and the soil carbon. So these are pictures of German soils under agriculture use, and it's pretty easy to see they are really diverse. And we have soils that store only 13 tons of carbon in the first meter, and we have soils that store almost 700 tons of carbon. And it's a huge diversity and a huge pleasure to work with soils because it's never boring. But it's a huge challenge. And Johannes mentioned that we did the first agriculture soil inventory across Germany, more than 3,000 sites that we sampled to really see how much carbon is where, and is this carbon changing over time. The first inventory was finished in 2018, and now we are running the second inventory to see the changes in soil carbon stocks. This is done because we are performing or providing the National Inventory Report for Agriculture and Land Use for Germany. So we have to calculate the numbers of the greenhouse gas fluxes, and that include also changes in soil carbon stocks. And if we look at the soil carbon across Germany, you see also the diversity at very small scales. So each point here is a sampling point where we went and where we sampled a field site and measured the soil carbon. And if you imagine you would walk to the next point, which is 8 kilometers apart, you cannot predict what you will find at this point, because the scatter and the diversity of carbon stocks is huge. And this is the topsoil, which we refer to the first 30 centimeters, but also below 30 centimeter, we have carbon. And here it's even more diverse and more challenging to really predict how much carbon you find over there or down there. Yeah, and this is the first question. Can we measure soil sea sinks? And Johannes said, yeah, people need to buy certificates without really seeing what they got. And we need to, with these certificates, ensure that a real carbon stock change is achieved, and therefore we need to measure it. And here I provide you with a calculation, how much is possible, or where's the challenge. So if we start carbon sequestration measures in agriculture, we can achieve 0.2 tons of carbon per hectare and year increase in carbon stocks. And if we convert this into a change in the carbon content, which is the measure that we actually do in the field, measure the carbon content of the soil, it's only in the second digit that the carbon content is changing within 5 years. And if you are aware of problems in analysis and analytics, I will come to this later, you can already see, wow, that's challenging in the second digit to find carbon content changes. And it's a relative change of 11% on average. And here I provide you with the errors that are connected to measuring carbon. The smallest error is the analytical error in the lab. It's roughly 1%. And then we have a laboratory error, that is if we use the same sample and measure it twice, it's a little higher. And the highest error is in the field. It's roughly 7% if we remeasure the same soil pit twice. So we only moved it, let's say, 10 centimeter, cleaned it again, the soil pit, and sampled again. And we had 7% different carbon stocks measured at these field sites. And if you remember, 11% is the change that we can obtain on average in 5 years. And the error measuring at one field site at one point in time is already at the same order of magnitude. And this is really due to the small scale variability of carbon. Even within a small field site, we have huge variability, and even within a few meter distant, we have here an error which is several tons of carbon, 2 to 5 tons of carbon error measuring, because carbon is really nothing which is homogeneous at a field site, but there are ups and downs, and we have to cope with this small-scale variability, and that makes it really difficult to measure carbon stock changes. We have people in the lab working hard. I want to show you, it's really lots of handwork. So they're really separating stones and soil material here. They are running machines to measure the soil carbon content. And it's really, lots of work to get to this. And therefore, we, of course, work also at other data sources, and the satellite data are really coming up and providing a very interesting data source to monitor soil carbon. And what we used here and where we worked on are bare soil composites. These are satellite data merged together only at time points where there's no vegetation on our cropland sites. And this is really the color of the soil combined here, and you really see we have regions with dark color where we can see, there is more carbon, and regions with lighter colors where there's less carbon. And we modeled this and used this data and provided carbon maps. And to be honest, I was surprised how good they are. So I was skeptical in the beginning when we started with this, but only with the satellite data, the green, blue, and near-infrared bands, we could very well predict carbon, meaning an R-square of 0.7 roughly, and a root mean square error of 0.6%. So if you remember, the carbon stock changes in 5 years are 0.02% points. The error of the map is 0.6%. So we are more than 1 magnitude higher with the error of the map compared to the changes that we expect. There is a large potential in the satellite data, but it's still a huge challenge to detect these very, very small changes for the background of huge variability and errors also with satellite data. And therefore there would be another option to move forward with carbon farming, and that would be to award not results in sea sinks, but measures to be taken to achieve carbon sinks. One measure would be in agriculture, for example, cover crops. If we grow cover crops, or if we go for agroforestry, you could say, roughly this and this amount of carbon will be sequestered, for example, with well-calibrated models. And we do not measure the actual result in carbon stock changes in the field, but we use other means like models, or it's basically models to estimate this. But what has been proposed by the European Commission and the European Parliament agreed in February on this is a regulation of for a carbon removal regulation that really is based on measurements and result-based carbon farming. So the EU already decided we want to go for result-based, and therefore we have to further develop techniques to detect carbon stock changes. Yeah, here is a broad overview of what can be achieved in sea sequestration rates with different measures. Increasing crop types, cash crops, flower stripes, perennial energy crops. These are only a few examples what can be done to enhance the soil carbon stocks. And if we include the biomass in agroforestry or hedges, we can even achieve more on 1 hectare of land. And the key to achieve more carbon in the soil is the input of carbon to the soil in forms of biomass. Because the soil carbon originates from biomass, from roots, from straw, from leaf litter. All this material, like in your compost heap, is kind of degrading and is providing soil carbon, or is becoming soil carbon. And if we look at agricultural land in Germany, it's roughly 7 tons of carbon that enters the soil that are produced as primary production, and less than 4 tons of carbon that enters the soil with roots and straw and leaves. So we remove half of the carbon. And this is really a point which is maybe important also for all biomaterials and bioeconomy. We have problems with our soil carbon because we harvest so much carbon with our harvest products, with grain, with maize silage. And maybe we also want to harvest the straw because we say we want to have this as a feedstock to produce whatever kind of bio-based products. We can increase the carbon input to the soil, and this is here an example for cover crops. This is the business as usual scenario, how much carbon enters the soil. In Germany via cover crops, it's above ground biomass and below ground, so the roots. And if we grow more cover crops instead of leaving the soil bare during the winter season, we can really more than double the amount of carbon that enters the soil via cover crops. So this is one option. And with our models, we could also calculate how many tons of carbon we could sequester and via increased soil carbon content. It's 1 to 2 tons CO2 in a million tons of CO2 in Germany. So here I compiled different measures and what they could achieve in sequestering carbon within German agriculture soils, and cover crops is really a promising measure, or also undersown crops. We should really make sure that soils are always covered with vegetation. We could change our crop rotation, and also organic farming is at least thought to increase soil carbon stocks, and we could achieve this with a higher fraction of organic farming, which is a political aim. Also, agroforestry, new hedges, and converting cropland to grassland are measures to enhance soil carbon. But here I want to provide you with a feasible potential. So in theory, we could grow hedges everywhere and agroforestry everywhere and have, instead of croplands, only grasslands. But this is theory. And we have to make sure that we provide numbers that are not only theoretical, but more the practical potential. And therefore, I come to quite disappointing numbers in terms of sea sequestration potentials, with 3 to 6 million tons of CO2 that could be sequestered by building up soil carbon and biomass in agriculture. For me, it's important that we are really efficient in building up the soil carbon, and very efficient in building up soil carbon are roots compared to above ground biomass. And this is a research topic in our group, and we are always surprised how little data are available on the roots that are with our crops and with our in agriculture production. And we see that if we would have more roots, we could really help building up soil carbon without compromising yield or changing too much. 1 ton of root is resulting in 0.25 tons of soil carbon after 2 years on average, compared to 1 ton of above ground biomass, resulting only in 1/10 of ton soil carbon. So 90% of the leaves and the straw and everything which is produced above ground is decomposed within 2 years, and it's only 10% that remains as carbon, and here it's a bit more, it's 25%. Yeah, here it's again to illustrate the carbon cycle. This need to be, you should have this in mind. All the carbon that we have in our soils are derived from the atmosphere via photosynthesis. And if we talk about sea sequestration, we talk about a process of transferring this CO2 into the soil via plants or other organisms, and the soil needs to retain this soil carbon in order to achieve a global carbon stock increase. That is a definition that we worked on and published last year. And if we take this, and the first question is there a limit of the soils to store more carbon? So are the soils really able to store such an amount of additional carbon? And here we looked at long-term field experiments, and that had different carbon inputs via organic amendments, but we could also use straw or roots or whatever we have as carbon input to the soil. So what we put there, and then we look at the effect on the carbon stocks. And what you can see here always is a linear relation between what you put into the soil as carbon input, as biomass, and the carbon stock. And the more you put, the more carbon you gain in the soil. And it's a linear relationship. And 20 tons of carbon is really far beyond what is agriculture practice. That's a long-term field experiment, which is only theoretically. Maybe you remember the number. On average, we get 3.8 tons, 3.6 tons of carbon entering agriculture croplands in Germany. And in these experiments, we went up to 20 tons. And even under such extreme conditions, we see the soil is still increasing in soil carbon stocks. And that's a good message. And we also obtained it with our agriculture soil inventory. We can stabilize carbon as mineral associated carbon, and there's no limit of the soil imposed to sequester more carbon. In the end, it's only the biomass that is available, that is limiting, or that is limited, because we want to use it also for other purposes. Yeah, that's the good news. And now the bad news. Many soils in Europe are losing carbon. And this is here an example, a baseline where we have a CO2 flux from the soil, so we lose carbon. And if we start with a measure to enhance soil carbon, for example, cover crops, we might be only able to reduce the carbon loss. So it's a carbon loss mitigation. And it's not really that we can turn the system around so that it becomes a carbon sink. It might be really difficult to come from this situation where we are losing carbon to this situation, but only if we have a net flux from the atmosphere to the soil, we can call it sea sequestration. And here, this is illustrated here. On the right side, you see repeated inventories across Europe on croplands, and the carbon stock changes. And almost all of these inventories show carbon losses in the cropland. So we are really on a business as usual pathway, like here, where we are losing carbon. And if we implement a measure, we might achieve a lower loss of carbon, but sea sequestration means that we really need to go above the zero line. And that might be really difficult, at least in some soils. Yeah, and then we have, and now I come to the most complicated part of the whole thing, because we have different terms. And I also already introduced the term sea loss mitigation, so less carbon emissions. And you all know the term climate change mitigation, so something to contribute to climate change mitigation. Carbon sequestration, I provided you with this definition, so really taking carbon from the atmosphere and remove it and put it to the soil. And negative emissions. And these four things are not the same. And I want to give you a few examples. This is the before situation, before we start with a measure. And the measure for this example is more cover crops. And we have N2O emissions, and we have CO2 emissions. And in the before scenario, they are more or less on the same scale, compensating each other. But with the cover crops, we get more CO2 sequestered to the soil, and therefore we get climate mitigation, sea sequestration, and negative emissions due to this measure. Let's take another measure. And here we have the situation that we have a carbon loss in the business as usual scenario. So before we start a certain measure, and with introducing cover crops, we can only reduce the CO2 emissions. In the end, that means we achieve sea loss mitigation, so less carbon loss from the soil. We do something for climate mitigation, but we do not remove carbon from the atmosphere with sea sequestration, and we do not achieve negative emissions. Negative emissions also take into account the N2O emissions, so it's all about all greenhouse gases. And we can also go to other measures, and you see here with the red crosses and the green marks, with certain measures, depending on what is the situation before we start the measure, we can achieve sea sequestration without climate mitigation and without negative emissions. Or we can achieve climate mitigation without achieving sea sequestration or negative emissions. So we need to be really careful with these terms. And in the end, what you should keep in mind, sea sequestration is not equal to negative emissions. We need to really differentiate on this. And if you want to dig deeper in this, you can look at our paper from last year published in Global Change Biology, because I must admit, it's a complicated thing. And in our group, we were sitting many hours discussing this and ensuring that this figure is drawn correctly, because it's in the end not easy to understand. Yeah, the N2O emissions, I mentioned it in the last slide, and this is really important because it's not only about carbon, even though it's called carbon farming, but we have to ensure that the net effect on greenhouse gases are positive. And here you see a meta-analysis looking at N2O emissions. This is the greenish colors, and CO2. This is the soil carbon sequestration. And you see for certain measures, we have large bars of more carbon being sequestered and relatively small bars for additional N2O emissions. But we have also measures like no tillage, where the red bars, so the soil carbon sequestration, and the N2O emissions that are additionally emitted due to this measure are in the same order of magnitude. And therefore, we need to be really careful. And there's another topic for monitoring and for ensuring that carbon farming really helps for the climate and building up soil carbon. And this is leakage. And one option to produce leakage is our lateral sea fluxes. And lateral sea fluxes is organic amendments like manure, farmyard manure, or compost that you can move from one side to another side. And at the moment, lots of field sites get organic amendments as a fertilizer and therefore also provide positive effect on soil carbon. If we introduce CO2 certificates for building up soil carbon, we really induce motivation for these farmers to buy, let's say, a bit more compost and put it on this side. And then we can, the farmer can ensure, the carbon stock will increase with the compost. But the compost amounts are not, we cannot produce more compost. And in the end, it means that the compost that was distributed among different field sites will be concentrated on the few field sites that are within these certification schemes. So the farmer of this field gets CO2 certificates, but the other farmers working on these soils, they lose carbon in the same amount like these single farmers are building up soil carbon, and they are not in the certification schemes, and therefore, in the end, it's only leakage, and we could say it's greenwashing if we sell CO2 certificates based on more organic amendments with manure and compost. Yeah, and this has something to do with organic farming systems because they heavily rely on organic amendments because they need the nitrogen and the nutrients of the organic amendments because they are not allowed to use mineral fertilizers. And this is a quite new meta-analysis looking at the effect of organic farming on soil carbon. And if there's no effect, it's 1. If it's above 1, we have a positive effect of organic farming compared to conventional farming on soil carbon. And overall, we see roughly 15% more carbon in organic farms. If we select or if we focus only on sites that do not get additional organic amendments compared to conventional farms, so no offsite effects. These are these organic amendments transfer effects. We end up with non-significant effects of organic farming systems on soil carbon. And this is really alarming. I don't say that all organic farms are like this, but we need to be aware that if we look at a field site alone, it's not enough. We also need to look at the fluxes going into the field site and the harvest fluxes. So we need to have a total balance for the farm or the site to really be able to judge on the climate effects. And this needs to be done also with organic farms. And and there are good reason to say, yeah, organic farms can achieve a lot also for climate mitigation, but we need to be aware and take it into account that we produce only leakage if we ignore these non-offsite effects. And there's a third point to look at. So you see, we started with the carbon and the soil carbon and how to measure it. Then we have seen, okay, we need to be aware that the baseline can be declining trend. We need to be aware of the N2O emissions. We need to be aware of leakage and transfer of carbon with manure. And now we also have to be aware of the area footprint of a farming system. And this is a provocative figure from a book from Kirschmann showing the following. Organic farms produce less yield on the same area amount. And therefore, to produce the same amount of products, they require more land. And therefore, less land is available for forests or other natural land. And these forests and natural land, they store a lot of carbon. And here in this illustration, they suggest that means in total less carbon at a global scale. Compared to conventional farms that have higher yields and therefore only need less area for food production, and more area is available for natural ecosystems. This is the topic of indirect land use changes. So we use too much agriculture area outside of Germany and Europe, and we need to ensure that this import of products and also moving greenhouse gas emissions from here to other countries need to be taken into account, and not and we should not increase it with our measures that we start here. Yeah, and for me, I would also like to look beyond the carbon and climate topic, because soil organic carbon and soil organic matter is much more than sea sequestration. If I look at the soil, almost all effects in the soil, physical effects like water retention, chemical effects, biological effects, everything is connected with soil organic matter. And therefore, if we start something to maintain and enhance soil organic matter, we are not only doing something good for the climate, but we are doing something good for the soil. And here it's illustrated with soil organic matter functions. On the left side, we see water retention. And here on the x-axis, it's the soil carbon content or soil organic matter content. And we see the more carbon we have in the soil, no matter whether it's a sand or a loam, we always increase the capacity of the soil to store water. It's climate mitigation. If we increase the carbon content, we also increase the aggregate stability and prevent erosion. So the more carbon we have in the soil, the better it is to prevent erosion. And we already talked about the climate impact. So we see that these relations are always linear, and therefore each bit of more carbon helps the soil functions or the soil organic matter functions. And for me as a soil scientist, therefore it's worth to talk about this and also to start measures to obtain more soil carbon. Yeah, and to finalize, I want to show you the greenhouse gas emissions produced by agriculture in Germany, to give you a broader perspective on what could be the role of carbon farming on this. And with fertilization alone, we have almost 30 million tons of CO2 equivalent emitted each year. With ruminants, methane emissions of 26 million tons are emitted. peatland drainage is a huge topic in Germany because they are responsible for almost 40 million tons of CO2 equivalent. We use energy and fuels in agriculture, and we also use mineral fertilizers that need to be produced, and we end up with more than 100 million ton of CO2 equivalent that can be dedicated to agriculture. And it's 14% of the total emissions, and this number will increase because all the other sectors will be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions faster than agriculture will be able in the next decades. Do you remember the number, how much is possible with carbon farming and soil sea sequestration in Germany? I gave you the numbers a few slides ago. What I calculated was 3 to 6 million tons. So compared to 100 million tons, you see that carbon farming can only provide one measure to make agriculture more climate friendly and to compensate for a small fraction of greenhouse gas emissions. The organic soils are really a huge topic, and it's a similar dimension of our coal phase out, Kohleausstieg, in terms of money that would be required to really achieve re-wetting of drained peatlands and also to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. To finalize, I want to give you 3 take-home messages. So, to my opinion and according to my analysis, most existing private CO2 certificates for soil carbon are prone to leakage, and I illustrated this to you with N2O and organic amendment problems. Only a small fraction of greenhouse gases can be compensated with sea sequestration, and the focus should always be on emission reduction. And many croplands in Europe are losing carbon, and therefore we should stop them losing carbon before we can claim that they can become a CO2 sink. But as I said, it's worth to work on soil carbon issues because it's also about a more sustainable agriculture. And therefore, I thank you for your attention, and it's open to questions now and discussion. We have lots of time left, I think.
Thank you very much, Axel, for this very insightful and in-depth overview. We have a little more than half an hour left, so floor is open to questions and comments. As I said at the beginning, you can either raise your hand or you can ask in chat if you do not want to be recorded. Okay, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Axel, for this interesting presentation. I need to confess that I did not follow all the, let's say, natural science details. And so, but it was still very interesting and illuminating. My question, though, would be more on the, let's say, political framework around carbon farming. And you mentioned that most private certificates are prone to leakage. That was like on your last slide. And also before you mentioned the CRCF framework. And as I understand, the European Union now aims to establish a voluntary market. You also said that. And this CRCF framework was a major step forward. And if one reads about that, it seems to set definitions and standards and quality criteria for, let's say, a standardized measurement and certification scheme. Can you tell us a bit how you assess this framework in light of the uncertainties that you mentioned regarding different soil types, leakages, and so on? How much does this framework actually address these uncertainties? How much does it cover these, let's say, open questions or uncertainties? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yeah, looking at this framework, you see it's not going into details, to be honest, and it's a good basis because the quality criteria and the basics are done well, with some exceptions, let's say, but it's already a lot of paper, more than 60 pages, and it's complicated as it is only for the carbon farming part. And the critical point is a standardized baseline. So how to measure if carbon is sequestered and if greenhouse gases are really sequestered. And in order to do this, they want at a regional scale define a baseline. And if a farmer is better, then he or she can be awarded CO2 certificates. And that means this baseline is really crucial. And if you have such a baseline at a regional scale, you can easily imagine in each region, there will be farmers that are already below the baseline, so they are better than the baseline. They don't need to do anything, and they could say, yeah, we are better than the baseline. Here are the CO2 certificates, and they could sell them. And it's not clear how it shall be ensured that these situations happen, because the baseline is not really at a field scale and at a farm scale looking before and after, but it's at a regional scale. And it's also not clear how it will be calculated. What will be the carbon baseline? Will it be a trend, a declining trend as we've seen it in the inventories, so that we could say, yeah, all farmers that achieve no carbon loss could sell CO2 certificates? Yeah, that would be possible, or how it will be done. So there are lots of open questions. What I really like in this framework is the priorities, and the priorities are set well. Priority is on peatlands and rewetting peatlands. Second, priority is on building agroforestry, because this is a measure that can sequester lots of carbon on small space, because it also includes the biomass. And it's easy to monitor from space with satellites. You can see whether there is a new agroforestry system or not. And only as third option, soil carbon is in there. The framework also includes the N2O emissions and the other greenhouse gases. But yeah, we've seen it, for example, in Australia. Years ago already, they had a soil carbon farming system, and they want to make it large and sell lots of certificates for soil carbon, and it never worked. It was a niche, and it remained a niche, and at some point they gave up and said, it's not working. It's too complicated. Nobody wants to buy it. How to measure it, how to really ensure that carbon is sequestered and stored on long term. And this is what I kind of see, that the whole topic and the whole sequestration issue, if you want to nail it down to tons of CO2, is so complicated that it might not be possible to really convert it into a business case. In the end, it might be only the labs measuring soil carbon, or the institutes working on the satellite data for monitoring. They can maybe be the winners and get more money. But in the end, it's about transforming in agriculture towards more climate friendliness. And I'm not sure whether these result-based carbon farming schemes and CO2 certificates are really the way how we achieve this.
Yes, Christina.
Maybe just going in that direction, looking on what is planned with ETS3, so pricing the emissions in the agricultural sector, you would have a different opinion? Because I mean, then and kind of the whole land system is also on the emission side regulated, and then it might be easier to get negative emissions in there.
The whole farming systems are always complicated, and therefore we need to set up good systems to, in the end, monitor the greenhouse gas emissions per product and per area. And this is required not only for carbon farming frameworks, but also in general, we see it from agri industry, agri and food industry, and also the banking sector. There's a lot of pressure now to really show at the farm level how climate friendly we are as farmers. And we need to ensure that these kind of tools are set up in a way that they don't miss leakage stuff, and then it would work and move things into some direction. And for me, instead of these CO2 certificates on a voluntary market, we should also look at the gap and the huge amounts, billions of euro going into the agriculture sector, and there we need to develop tools how to really get it to these farms that move towards more climate friendliness. And it's a huge challenge. I'm not sure how it will be done, because I know the diversity at the farm level, I know the diversity at the soil level, and we need lots of data, and the farmers are really afraid of giving away more data, and therefore it will be challenging to set up good schemes.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Karina, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting. I would like to know, you were more focusing on the biomass production. What is your opinion, or what does study say about no tillage and reduced tillage and the effect of this method for the carbon in the soil? Is this because we see no tillage and reduced tillage as a good option to store carbon in the soil, even kind of better as cover crops. So this is for me really interesting to know what the study says.
Yeah, it depends really on which soils you are. And the no-tillage systems, they're coming from the US mainly, and also in the tropics, in Argentina and Brazil, they're using lots of no-till. And therefore, it's really successful because they have water shortage. And with less tillage operations, you can keep more water in the soil. And therefore, plants are growing better. And if plants are growing better, they produce more biomass, and also more roots, and therefore soil carbon is enhanced. In our systems here, we see little effects of no tillage on total soil carbon stocks. It might change when we move into an even more hotter climate, but the effects has been overestimated during the last decades, and the average amount of carbon that could be sequestered with converting from conventional to no-till has been decreasing each year, and there are always new meta-analysis out there even claiming there is no carbon sequestration effect of reduced tillage or a no-tillage. I would say there is a small effect, but we need to be really careful with the N2O emissions. If they are enhanced at the same time, then there's no climate benefit. No tillage, to make it very clear, is very good for the soil. In many soils, it's really good if you till less because of erosion because of the biodiversity in the soil. So the earthworms, they really profit from reduced tillage. So there are good reasons to move from conventional to no tillage. But in some soils, the carbon effect will be minor.
Thank you.
If there are no immediate questions from anybody right now, I would like you to say something about permanence, perhaps, because that's something that you didn't cover in your talk so much, but that's also a huge problem that's discussed. How do you assure that measures that are taken now and storing carbon now will also be there in 5 years or 50 years or 500 years? So yeah, maybe you could say a few words about that.
Yeah, you're right. I missed this in my talk because it's really complicated. Because here we see that we have a problem in combining carbon stock changes into the same unit of CO2 fluxes or equivalent fluxes like N2O fluxes. If we reduce the N2O fluxes or the methane fluxes by 50% or by 5%, these are climate effects. They are forever, and they are and in contrast to the soil carbon. The soil carbon effects are reversible because at some point we could also lose the sequestered carbon. And here we need to go into details because also temporary ceasings have climate effects, but they are much less than if we would store the additional carbon, let's say, forever and permanent. And there are discussions and papers written and trying to really bring together these very different things, stock changes that are non-permanent, because soil carbon is never permanent. You have to maintain a certain measure forever to keep the soil carbon in there. And even if you keep this measure, you can lose the carbon at some point, maybe due to climate change. If the soil is getting warmer due to climate change, we have more microbial activity and we lose the carbon at some point. And on the other side, these CO2 fluxes and the unit that we often use, CO2 equivalent. And I think we have to move to another unit, which is climate forcing in watts per square meter, for example. That's another unit where we can better bring these things together, but it's getting more and more complicated with this. And we need models for this, and it's a different unit, and it's even more difficult to calculate it and to convert it into CO2 or into certificates. Yeah, this is my what I think about it. And I think if we see soil carbon as something that also has other benefits beside CO2 sequestration, then we are on the safe side. Then we always profit from it, even though it might be lost at some point. And therefore, I really encourage everybody to look a bit more broader. Also taking aspects of biodiversity, food security, sustainable soil management into account when judging on measures and when moving forward. And we have the problem that with this CRCF directive, it's coming from DG Climate and not from DG Agri, even though it's on carbon farming. And therefore it has a very narrow focus on climate mitigation. But our agricultural systems are complex, and we have many different aims in agriculture that we need to achieve in transforming agriculture for the future. And this is not possible if we focus only on such a very small and narrow indicator.
Thanks a lot. Yes, Karina.
I would also like to bring up a more political question. So if the European Commission or Union will start a framework for carbon farming, would this discriminate farmers who are already on their transition and they couldn't get those as much certificates as other farmers who has recently started to store carbon in the soil, and how can this be not happen?
Yeah, thanks. That fits very well here, because if we focus on CO2 removal, then we cannot care whether a farmer has no option to sequester more carbon because he already implemented all the measures or not. Then it's all about sequestering and removing a CO2. And it might be not fair. But if we move away from this very narrow focus on CO2 certificates and look at measures, and measures where we also see they have synergies with other aims, then we could say we pay for these measures, and we pay also farmers that implemented the measure 30 years ago, and there will be no additional sea sequestration, because if you start with the measure, you sequester more and more carbon, and then you reach a new steady state. Even though you keep the measure, you cannot sequester more, but you have to maintain this measure. And the farmers could be awarded and paid for maintaining this measure if we see it is really good to keep this measure, and it has a value also for other targets, biodiversity, soil protection, and so on. And this is really the big question. Do we need this CO2 tons of CO2 to really sell it on this big market of certificates and to achieve climate mitigation via this? Or are we able to really look beyond and look at the total agriculture system and also take fairness as a component into account?
Thank you.
Maybe as a follow-up question, that's something that's come up repeatedly now, that you would strongly advise policymakers as well as businesses to focus on measures rather than focus on effects, or measured effects, I guess, would be more correct. Since, I mean, and I've read this elsewhere as well, and it seems a very, very convincing point. Do you have insight into why that's not the route that is being taken almost anywhere? In the US, in the voluntary market, I think there's one scheme that pays farmers based on measures, and everybody else at least claims to base their payments on actual carbon stored, which for a voluntary market maybe makes sense, but for a EU Commission, I think they have more leeway in how they operate, or one would assume that they do. So do you have any insight on what the history of these decisions are? Because I would assume that most soil scientists agree with you on this.
Yeah, it's because the carbon farming thing is together with other carbon removal technologies, carbon capture and storage, and storing it in products and wood products and stuff, with, let's say, no additional benefits if we do this and put CO2 into geological formations. And it comes from DG Climate, and it's really separated from the Common Agricultural Policy that really pays for measures. And if we would further develop this, it would be a measures-based scheme, but it comes from a different direction. I've no more insight on this, but I know that it's a complicated issue, and we know that to really progress with a common agricultural policy is a difficult thing, and it's still not satisfying what is going on there. And maybe at the EU level, they said it's so complicated to move forward with this. Let's try something in parallel. And then they set up something which is kind of disconnected from this and therefore focused only on CO2 removal. Yeah. It's a political thing, a social science thing, and therefore you are important to find out where are really why is it so difficult to move forward with this? Where are the stakeholders that do not want to move into further developing agriculture policies together with climate policies?
Christine.
Question goes a bit in that direction. We now talked a lot about policymakers, but how we get the farmers on board. So which narrative and which things on how you would get them into the board? Is this focusing on measurement, on measures, also something where you would think the farmers and the farmers' unions would get on board? And yeah, what would be your narrative to kind of frame also the farmers not as the big emitters or something like that, but rather kind of get them as the solvers, the heroes, whatever, on board in this farming thingy?
Yeah, the farmers, they're in a difficult situation because they thought that with carbon farming, they could really switch from being the bad boy to the good boy, helping the whole society to achieve the climate targets. And then we see that it's not the case. And if they, with carbon farming, could compensate a small fractions of their own emissions, that would be cool. And we talk about dairy production, for example. The milk producing farms and dairy production, they want to become carbon neutral, and we calculated so how many hedges and trees they should plant and how much biochar they should bury somewhere. And it's an enormous amount of effort they need to start in order to become climate neutral. I think the farmers are willing, but it's a lot of transformation that is required. And in particular, the question, so how many animals and animal production can be maintained in the future? For the farmers we have seen with the biogas, this is for me a good example. If we have good, simple funding schemes, that makes it economically sound for them to change and to invest in something, then they are going for it. And these need to be set up. But it seems that if it's too complicated and with too many risks, then they are not doing anything. Farmers are quite resistant in jumping on every new fashion. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's difficult to really further transform and develop agriculture. Yeah, but the narrative, it's a good question. And talking to farmers, I see that farmers are so diverse, and there are a few farmers that are really pioneers, and they're doing a lot of things and trying out new things at their farms. And we work in a project with 150 farmers together called Humus Klimanetz. And this is a really cool project because there we have these kind of pioneer farmers on board, and they are all willing to do something and to work also with us as scientists together. But there are also many, many thousands of farmers. They don't want to hear anything about climate mitigation or greenhouse gas balances because they are struggling also with all the regulations, and they are struggling also with the economics. So we have a reduction in animal production during the last years, and this was not because we, on a political level, we really foster and support this, but it was purely the economics that forced these farmers to give up. We are losing farms and farmers, and we have to we have to find policies that cope with this diversity of farms and motivations of farmers, and find good ways not to put all the risk in transforming their farms only on their side, but taking some of the risk also to the society side. And this is not easy.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we have about 6 minutes left. If there's any pressing last question, now's your chance to ask or remain forever silent. Sarah.
Yes, thanks. I would use the opportunity to go back to the connection you draw between carbon farming and food security. And you said you would come back to that. Maybe you can, briefly explain what you meant or where you see the connection. It would be interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for coming back to this important point, because this is really the core of soil science. I showed a little bit on this with the soil organic matter functions, and one function of soil organic matter is to enhance the water storage capacity or water retention capacity of the soil. And this is directly related with food security. We've seen it in 2018-19, when we had these drought years. Farmers were really shocked how yields were declined. We will not really compensate such a decline with more soil carbon, but we will be able to dampen this. And we've seen it also with floods and strong rain events. We need to work more on the soil and to make it really more resilient to climate extremes. And in the end, this also means that food security is enhanced, because we see that less yield decline with such climate change events will happen. It's not a direct relation, and we are working on this to really show the farmer the value of additional carbon for their yield. But there's no simple direct connection, but it's a very complex one, also depending on the site conditions. So if you're working in Brandenburg, where you already have drought during summer and very low capacity of the soils to retain water, topics are much more pressing, and the effects working with the soil and, for example, installing agroforestry systems are much larger for the whole system, agriculture system, including the food security, than if you work with a farmer in other parts of Europe or Germany. It depends really on where you are. And this makes it also so difficult to help the farmers transform their farm, because it needs to be very individual, based on the soils and the climate and the farming system. But in the end, it's all about making farming systems more resilient and more climate friendly. We need to work on both. And for me, one core topic is the soil, to focus more on the soil and to help the soil with more soil organic carbon to become more resilient. If you ask me, Sarah, if there's a good publication showing whatever relation between yield and soil carbon levels, this is not available for our European climate zone. there are publications showing this relationship for agriculture systems that are not so intensive, like in China or Africa. And there you can really see that more carbon helps with food security, with more yield. In our agriculture systems, it's not obvious, this relationship, and we are working to disentangle the different factors, including the soil carbon impact.
Okay, thank you very much once again, Axel, and also everybody else for participating and listening in.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the discussion. It was really good. And I also like this interdisciplinary approach to bring disciplines together. So thanks for inviting me here as a soil scientist.
Anytime. Okay, so thanks again to everybody and have a wonderful evening or day if you're not in our time zone.